Sorry, that's my apologies. My practice session may have ran over time. My bad. I was just practicing flute. You just heard me. No, you just heard an amazing recording from Leslie Newman, and we'll be getting into that later today. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the summer edition of the Faculty of Music's signature series, Thursdays at Noon. This special summer series is presented by the University of Toronto Alumni Relations Office and the Faculty of Music. My name is Korin Thomas-Smith, and I have the honor of being your host for today. I'm a two-time graduate of the Faculty of Music, and as a student, I had the great fortune of attending and performing in these many free concerts and performances in Walter Hall at the faculty every Thursday at noon during the academic year. We are so grateful to all of you for joining us this summer. I encourage you to keep an eye out on our website, music.utoronto.ca, and on all our social media channels, which is the @ U of T Music. For any further updates about performances this fall, like our free Thursday at noon concert series. I want to have a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We recommend that you use headphones to listen to the performances today, just for the best audio experience. But if you don't have it, I'm sure it'll be fine. And feel free to please ask us any questions you have for our artists or for myself or for anyone really. What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of the world? Who knows? Put in the Q&A box and we'll give you an answer. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Leslie Newman. Leslie Newman is a principal flautist at the Hamilton Philharmonic Orchestra, and it's a post she has held since 2008. In her career as a principal flautist, she's performed with Halle Orchestra, Bournemouth Symphony, the CUC Orchestra. And as a soloist, she has recited in the UK and has toured through Brazil, Argentina, Japan, Europe, US, and has performed with Sir Simon Rattle. So please give a round of applause to Leslie Newman.
Hi, Korin. How great to see you.
Great to see you as well. I hope you're doing well. I'm so excited to get into a little talk today.
I'm looking forward to today also. Thank you. Yes.
Great. And to not let these people wait in their seats in suspense of hearing your amazing artistry, I'd like to just get straight started and introduce the first piece for today, which we'll be discussing, which is the Vidor Suite for flute and piano, Opus 34. This you performed with Peter Longworth, who is a pianist, and you will be hearing movements 1 and 4. So again, the Vidor Suite for flute and piano. Wow, that was amazing. What a great way to start off today.
Oh, how lovely to see our jewel of a concert hall, Walter Hall, at the Faculty of Music, where these concerts historically took and will continue to take place. But also, Korin, for many of our audience, and certainly for me, how uplifting to see and hear our beloved Peter Longworth. It's such a joy for me to hear him again and playing with him for me. You know, I always felt so perfectly safe and secure playing with Peter because he had this way, such an intuition of always knowing where I was going with the phrase before I even knew, and a beautiful way also of nudging me into an even better direction. And so, you know, there's some people that just will always be with us through their music.
Yeah, amazing artistry from you both. I loved hearing it. It was just so delightful. I often don't listen to a lot of being a singer myself. I don't listen to a lot of instrumental music, and I think that is a flaw that I'm seeing more and more with these Thursday sessions. I'm hearing such amazing artistry from so many different, such a wide breadth of musicianship. It's amazing. So I wanted to thank you so much for your playing. I wanted to get started with a question from the audience, which also kind of ties to the question I wanted to get into. I wanted to ask you as to how you started being a musician and how that journey sort of developed for you, because especially seeing Walter Hall, where I and yourself have had our own sort of educational upbringing through our own degrees when we studied at the University of Toronto, our own respective times. And also a question from the audience, how long it took for you to really develop your own kind of unique sound.
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I love that question. Well, I think this is something that is constantly evolving, and yet I would say that the sound that the sound that I feel is my sound, the core of it is still there ever since, I would say, my early 20s. The core is there, and then there are certain aspects of it that develop, I think, continually. But there is a certain life, and I think that's because you know, we develop as people, and that life within us is ultimately what becomes.
Okay.
Perhaps also be.
Oh, sorry, Leslie, to interrupt. I think we missed maybe around a couple of seconds of what you were saying. You were talking about the life, the core of the sound, and the life that you lived infects your unique sound.
Thank you, Korin. Yes, I do think our sound is a reflection of us. So as we change, our sound changes. But I think the core of my sound has been consistently similar since my 20s. Yeah.
Nice. And for those of us who may be inexperienced, myself included, what does it mean to have a unique sound in terms of flute, in terms of like instrumental performances? It may be a kind of an odd question, but.
No, it's a great question. I'm wondering how best to answer it, because we recognize certain great players immediately, as you do and as we do, great singers from the first few notes that they sing. We know who that is. And perhaps it's not as pronounced with instrumentalists as it is with singers, and yet it's still something that's very recognizable. If you play Julius Baker, we immediately know this is Julius Baker. And so I'm trying to think how best to answer your question, but I think there are different ways in which our own bodies create the sound. As a flute player, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about the flute, but truly, ultimately, I would say at least 95% of the sound is the resonance of our own body. So that's what gives us, I believe, our own unique sound.
That's amazing. Yeah. Again, a lot of us can really get instrument specific, especially, again, not to bring to the voice all the time, but like, I know I sound the way I sound because my body is built in a particular way. I never really think about the bodies of an instrumentalist being able to impact the sound they're able to create. It's kind of I think a lot of us can imagine that the instrument itself is static, and we just maybe manipulate sort of aspects of it. You manipulate the air speed and maybe the amount of closures within a pipe. But there's much more of a physical element that we can see. that affects it. I think that's interesting to note.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And flute, I mean, all of us instrumentalists, we are always trying to emulate the voice. And flute, we like to think of ourselves as being so close to the voice because we're not blowing into our instrument, but across it. So it really is just the vibrations of the breath, now through the tube rather than the vocal cords, but nonetheless, it's very close to the sound of the voice. And so our own body has a huge impact on the sound. Also, I like to think of, so I'm playing on the same flute now for over 20 years. And I think that the part that the instrument plays, I like to think of.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I think we missed a part. You were talking about the part that the instrument plays. You've been playing the same flute for 20 years. And you like to think of, and that's where we kind of cut off.
Thank you, Korin. Yes. So we think about this often with wooden instruments that the molecules actually line up through the vibrations. And also with the metal, there's some sort of alchemy that takes place. And so I feel like my instrument and I are vibrating sympathetically at this point.
Yeah. It's just amazing to see the kind of broad range that the flute repertoire can actually go to. We heard the Vidor suite now, and our next piece coming up is actually a Bach Partita in A minor for solo flute, BWV number 1013. And I'm very excited to see how that changes between styles. This is, I believe, is just a piece just for solo flute, right? So we're gonna see how the flute handles its own as well sonically as compared to what we just heard with the piano and what it can do and the colors that can create there. I'm very excited to see. Sorry. So the next piece we'll be hearing is Partita in A minor for solo flute by J.S. Bach. That's amazing. And I am, again, left kind of speechless as to the ability that the flute has to be such a versatile sort of instrument. I don't know, like seeing this kind of the amount of like kind of forward virtuosity that's able to happen throughout the instrument is amazing to see. It's kind of a beast in of itself.
It's amazing to think that this piece was written in the 1720s. So in an earlier iteration of the flute, certainly when we didn't have the same system of keywork that we have now. Yeah, this is a very special piece to us, the Bach's Partita. He wrote 6 solo partitas for both the violin and the cello, just this one precious piece for us as a solo partita. And it's representative, each movement, of one of the most popular dances of the time. So it's really a dance suite proper, with the first movement being an Allemande. This movement that we just heard, a Courant, Sarabande is the third movement, and Bourrée is the last movement. So quite remarkable how he's able to imply these complex harmonies with the single voiced instrument, and that implied counterpoint really is the driving force of this piece, which, as you say, it is very virtuosic.
Yeah. I was just thinking about there's a deep point in my life. The flute that I had on when we just started this stream is a flute I've been renting for the last little while because I wanted to get back into playing an instrument and doing something creative and being bad at something again and trying to be good at it as a musician and taking on a new challenge. And the flute is it's so hard because something about the flute, the characteristic of the flute, is that a lot of the fingerings between registers are actually the same. It's just all about the speed of the breath. You can go between a register just by making the air move faster across the flute, and then that changes the register, which does that. I want to ask, when you're practicing these things, of course you have years of experience, but as you're practicing these things, how do you get that specificity that happens in this piece like this, which is so dependent on the creation of harmonies and arpeggiation?
Korin, did I miss something at the beginning of this program? Were you playing a flute?
Oh, well, let me get it. This baby right here, a good old Yamaha.
Yes.
I went it from Long McQuaid. It's definitely past the week that I was supposed to return it, so I'm gonna go today and bring it back. But I was doing some recording projects. I'm trying to accompany myself with a flute and trying to create something interesting. And I realized just how difficult it was. And back when I knew that thing, I'm about to talk at length, but there's like this graph where it's like, the more you do something, the better you get at something, the worse you think you are at it. And the least experience you have with, the better you think you are at it. I put this when I was like 17. So I thought I was so good. And I was here for a reality check when I heard myself play these days. But sorry, back to the question I was asking you. How do you get that methodical sort of process that is practicing like a piece like Bach?
It's so gratifying to hear you say, oh, the flute's so hard, because usually what we hear is the flute is the easiest instrument. So
really?
So that's so nice. But as we know, just as you're saying, the more you dive into anything, the more you realize you don't know. So certainly with what you say about the different air speeds, it's super important. The flute actually divides into 3 distinct registers, and we have the bottom and the top registers take the same angle of air, which is not to get too technical, but slightly lower than the middle octave, where our air is just slightly more straight across. So there's also, as you say, there's airspeed involved, but also slight differentiation. And of course that's tiny, because the distance between our lip to the wall on the outside edge of the embouchure hole is so small that the tiny differentiation in angle makes a big difference. But all of those things are involved. And yes, it's a process, I guess, of getting more and more precise with hitting the note you want to hit.
Yeah, I will be in your email asking for lessons soon enough. I want to ask you a question from the audience. Have you ever played as in the role of an accompanist, maybe for a singer? How is that sort of collaboration different than being necessarily a solo flautist?
Well, I play a lot of chamber music, and I play in orchestra. And I sometimes also play in a section when I'm playing. If I'm not playing with my orchestra, sometimes I'm so fortunate to play with the Canadian Opera Company Orchestra, and there I'm playing beside my wonderful colleague and teacher from my undergrad days, the wonderful flautist Doug Stewart, as second flute. And so that's very much a supportive role. So I think that I feel very comfortable in both, and I love both because there are different things to explore. So if I'm playing second flute or in chamber music as well, for me, what's beautiful about it is just being so attuned to the people that I'm playing with. It's like I was saying about Peter earlier, there's almost an intuition or a sense of connection that's just so deep that we kind of know, we can sense where each other is headed, and we're right there with them. So I think our goal is never to be following, even in a supportive role, but to be stepping side by side with our partner. And that takes a real connection, which I think is precious and deep. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, that I love that, that thought of collaboration, not being as a leader and follower, but more as two people or two groups equally going the same pace. Since we're just talking about orchestra, I think it would be great to introduce our next piece, which is a Malcolm Arnold piece, Concerto No. 1 for flute and strings, Opus 44, Movement 3, Con fuoco. It's really interesting to hear all the contexts in which we're hearing flutes. We hear flute and piano, we're hearing flute as a solo instrument, and now we're hearing a flute against an orchestra, or rather with an orchestra. So I'm very excited to hear this. So again, next piece is Concerto No. 1 for flute and strings by Malcolm Arnold. I too will join in an applause. That was so amazing. How spirited and exciting a piece. It's described as con fuoco, but I think you brought the foco.
He does. He marks it con fuoco, with fire, and it's such an extroverted romp. It's driving, it's exciting, and short. But it's, we hurtle through these. We just hurtle full tilt through these bars of 16th notes. It's very exciting. It ends with a bang. Malcolm Arnold wrote this piece when he was 33, and some might say it was maybe a more optimistic and uplifting time in his life, but I love the energy of this piece.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, we have a question from the audience, and I think, we have a question from the audience that I think is very interesting to that as well. you're talking about how he was in a certain point of time when he wrote this. So obviously he as a composer has a certain intention. There's a question the audience was asking, what is your opinion on your own personal musicality versus the composer intention? How do you negotiate that difference, especially when it comes to older eras? So again, we have Bach and we have something as recent as Malcolm Arnold. How do you negotiate your own artistic voice versus their intention?
So this is such a great, great question. And we could probably talk for hours about it. But I mean, my strong feeling really is that the score is God, where music is concerned. The problem is that sometimes the score is not, does not have, it's sort of like the Bible. It's been interpreted too many times by editors, or maybe it, it has not always full information. So the score is God to the extent that it's able to be, and then we sometimes do have to make judgment calls using our best scholarship and experience and intentions, I think, for what the composer meant. But I do think our guiding light is always, what did the composer want?
For sure. I feel like, yeah, we can really talk at length. There's so many different sorts of thought regarding who drives the kind of vehicle of artistry and musicality, and I think that's very interesting. I never heard it likened to God, but
well, I don't think I've ever said that before. I don't know exactly where that came from, but let's just say that the score is our main source of information.
Of course. Yes. Well, speaking of interpretation, we are in weird days to be a musician, of course, with the COVID era. I've been kind of asking all our artists about how we're all staying engaged in a kind of new artistic frontier. How do you think you're staying being creative and musical during these times?
What this time does offer us is a bit of space to slow down and be reflective about our own relationships with our music. So although we're not able to make the music with our colleagues that we value so very much, we are able still to make music, and in some ways to perhaps go back to the fundamentals of our own music making. And so for me, it's been a very precious time for my own practice, for exploring some of the solo flute repertoire. And also I have been doing some projects during this time. The CBC actually put together a wonderful initiative, the Cbc Virtual Orchestra. So this was 32 different musicians from orchestras across Canada, and in our own spaces we recorded our parts, and they were put together into a beautiful interpretation of a new piece called Prayer that was recorded, it was composed, by Vivian Fung. And so this was a great initiative. I've had some master classes during this time with different summer academies that are going on. And something that's been really special to me also is every week, tonight, every Thursday, tonight will be the 8th, actually, I've had, I don't really call it a master class, I call it a practice session, but on Zoom, I've basically led an hour-long practice session where every week we have people from flutists. We have 15 to 20 flutists that show up, and some of them are current students, some are past students, and some are colleagues of mine that I work with in this area, and there are some from countries further afield as well. And we just spend an hour going through all the fundamentals of flute playing together. We play our long tones and our technical exercises, and it's been really related during this time, and perhaps to give some motivation to do this playing together. So that's also been a special way of just staying connected.
Yeah, of course. Are there any musical musical projects that you yourself are doing, perhaps to be solo? Are you recording anything? Is there anything interesting coming up? or maybe you want to explain, that's my way of bridging into the next piece. If you want to give any sort of context, that's what we're about to hear.
Okay, so when we were putting this program together, this piece did not yet exist in the form that you're going to hear it because I hadn't recorded it. So this is the work of a couple of Sundays ago. And it just seemed so current to bring in something, as you say, so it's something that I'm doing right now. So we're hearing these recordings of concerts I've given in the past, but now things have changed. This is a recording from the same studio where I'm sitting using my iPhone hooked up to a mic. And yes, so it's one of a few pieces that I've recorded during this time. It's by a composer named Ernst von Dohnanyi, his Passacaglia for solo flute.
Beautiful. Well, I'm very excited to hear. Again, so many of us are trying to find ways to create at home, and then I can't wait to be inspired as to how you also take on that task. So we'll be hearing the Passacaglia for flute by Ernst von Dohnanyi. Wow. It's crazy. That's an amazing work.
So let me tell you a bit about it because it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's a Passacaglia. It's 20 variations written on an 8-bar theme. And the 8-bar theme, the Dohnanyi was very much at heart a romanticist, but he wrote this piece in 1959. It was the last piece before he died. And he just gave a little nod and wink to modernism by putting all 12 tones in the theme. But at that point, any aspect of serialism left, and it just really stays true to his romantic, of this sort of lush writing that was so much his hallmark. But he wrote the piece because the friend of, after World War II, so he's Hungarian, and after World War II, Dohnanyi moved to Florida. Actually, he took up a position at Florida State University in Tallahassee, but he spent a lot of time at Ohio University, where he was great friends with the president, whose daughter played the flute. And at a concert there, he was playing a chamber work by Brahms, and Ellie, the daughter, said to him, "Oh, I so wish Brahms had written something for the flute." And Dohnanyi said to her, "Well, Ellie, Brahms didn't write for you, but I will." So it's such a beautiful story. And so he wrote actually 2 pieces for the flute. Both the Opus 48, number 1 is an aria, and this number 2 is a Passacaglia. He wrote it for Ellie, and apparently she loved it. She must have been a pretty advanced flute player, because I think she was only a teenager during this time. And he wrote to her and said, I must confess, I'm reading this little quote, I must confess that I love that Passacaglia very much, and I would have been disappointed if you would not like it or would have found it impossible to play, and that you get fond of it more the more you play it. Gives me still more satisfaction. That's lovely.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question of the audience. Probably maybe the one last one we may be able to get to, but how much do you practice now compared to maybe 20 years? 20 years ago, the piece you performed is very virtuosic and very, very difficult. It's from hearing anyways. Is there something you would have changed about your practicing if you can go back in time?
I don't think so. I was really lucky to have excellent teachers who always sort of taught me to be efficient in my practicing, which sadly never allowed me to practice less. But I think it maybe allowed me to sort of focus in on what I really needed to practice. And so I sort of have an approach with my pieces of taking out the technical passages and working on them. My teacher, Jules Baker, used to always practice things, or at least he would say he would always practice things at half tempo. And that's something that's really stuck with me. So I'll always do that with technical passages, playing them over and over, very much under tempo, so that I can really think about how my fingers are moving and work it into the musculature of my fingers and arms and body. So I don't think I'd change a lot in how I practice.
Oh, well, I would like to ask you if there's anything that you'd like to hear about the next piece. The next piece is Massenae Meditations from Thaïs. Is there anything you'd like to say about it?
Well, only that, there's lots I could say about this, but so please stop me if I speak for too long. So this, how many of us know this piece? We know and love this piece so much, but from an opera that none of us know, right? Who's heard Thaïs? Have you heard Thaïs, Korin?
Once or twice.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, I've heard of it, I should say, once or twice. I've never listened to the whole thing through.
Okay, it's an opera that doesn't get staged very often, but this piece, Meditation, is just so very beautiful. And in the opera, it's scored for violin and orchestra in the key of D major. So when I decided to put this on my CD, Opera Fantasy, I transcribed it into E major, because the lowest note in the original is an A, and the flute only goes down to a low B. And I really wanted to avoid any jumping around of octaves. So it's a tone up, which means that it uses almost really the entire range of the flute, from the low B ending on the high B, which is, near the top end of our range. Mm-hmm. So, and the pianist that I'm playing with is a pianist that I had the, joy and pleasure to play with regularly when I lived in England, John Lenihan. And I learned so much from playing with John. He's just such a creative and this piece also, one more thing, comes at such a transformative, this is a little teaser for anybody who wants to look up the opera or even just look up the synopsis of the opera. This piece, Meditation, comes at a really transcendent and pivotal moment in the opera.
Amazing. And my final question for you today, what's your favorite summer activity?
This summer or any summer?
Pick your favorite.
So, I love walking. I'm someone that just loves walking. I love getting out into nature and walking, and that can be in another country, or it can be in this extraordinary province where we have such beautiful walking trails. So getting up to Algonquin Park, or just getting on a walking trail and hiking for as long as I can, that's something that makes me really happy. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Leslie, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure to hear about what you do and to hear about something that I've always loved and been curious about, which is the flute. It's been amazing to talk to you. I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Korin, thank you. This has been such a pleasure. And I just want to say a big thank you also to my wonderful colleague, Jeff McFadden, Dr. Jeff McFadden, who's organized this series. It's been a pleasure to be part of it.
So yeah, it's amazing to talk to you. If you want to hear more from Leslie Newman, you can visit her website, which is just linked in the chat, which is leslienewman.ca, not .com, .ca. And you can hear her on Spotify and other streaming platforms. She has 2 CDs released, which is one being Beyond the Iron Curtain, which released in 2019 on Spotify, as well as the CD we're going to hear our next piece, which is Opera Fantasy, where we'll be hearing our next piece, which is Massenae Meditations from Thaïs. Thank you so much. So thank you all again for joining me today with our amazing guest, Leslie Newman, in our Summer Thursdays at Noon performance series. Let's give a round of applause in our own homes. Next week, please join us here again as we explore and discuss and listen to some more works next time for String Trio with our guest, the Griffin Trio. I'm very excited for that as well, a very known Toronto entity. And I'd like to have you guys there with me. So with that, I'd like to wish you guys a happy afternoon. Enjoy your summers. Goodbye.